And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to the Connected for Real podcast. I'm Rebbetzin Bat-Chen Grossman, a God centered marriage coach for women in business. And today I have Cheri. And I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I want to first introduce this really fun new season because we are going to be focusing on everyone who's helping the same types of women or the same angles, like we're talking about marriage, we're talking about relationships. And so I'm finding people who are in the same arena and we're really highlighting the differences. We're highlighting the things that we want you to know, what we all agree on, and so on. So let's get into it. Cheri, tell us why you're so awesome and why you get to be the first one on this awesome season.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love the name of your podcast because, like, it seems silly that we would not be actually connected with our partners and with other people. Like, why go through life kind of drifting and disconnected and having these superficial relationships? Like, let's actually be really connected.
Yes, thank you. So introduce yourself. Tell everybody
Okay.
what you do.
I am Cheri Timko. My title is a couples relationship coach because my mission in life is to reduce the rate of divorce. Now, what I really do is I work with women who want to change their relationship with their spouse, but their spouse just won't engage with them around changing things. So I tend to be very nuts and bolts, and like I want to find the thing that will work. Now I know that sometimes that may mean that we're talking about some deeper stuff, but more often we're talking about how do you talk about this? How do you bring it up? How do you work through this problem? How do you actually live well together?
I love that. And you started out by being a psychotherapist. You're not, I won't say just a coach because that's very not nice for people like us. But I feel like you're in this space for a long time and you're coming from a different angle. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've been a psychotherapist specializing in couples work for almost 20 years. So this is really a transition period for me where I'm moving from that one on one and one on two work in just this closed little environment to adding this new thing. I was going to say I wear two hats, but that's ridiculous. I wear like four hats. So
Only four?
I don't know. Yeah, because I'm also a homeschool mom. I'm also a wife. I also have three teenage daughters. So, like all these hats. So, the two that we're talking about mostly today are the hats of, coaching. And then I have the psychotherapy background.
Very cool. How do they come together and how do they actually contradict? How do you feel like, because, there's a lot of talk about this. I really want to hear what you think about it.
Um, I've had to think about this a lot because in order to continue being a psychotherapist and a coach, I have to know where the line is of who falls into which camp, and they can't be the same. So
Mm.
I focus on couples work in the psychotherapy where I'm working with both members of the couple. And I work with individuals, mostly individuals, because if someone comes to me and says, I want to work on my marriage, and we start working on it, and their spouse gets curious and they're like, hey, what's going on here? Then I am happy to bring them in and do that work together. But I see my role much more as working with the individual because I know that there are so many people out there who want to improve their relationship and they've taken that concern to their spouse. And for whatever reason, their spouse is like, no, I don't think it's a problem, or it's not my problem, or I just don't want to do that work. And so I think there's a real gap of people working with individuals to improve that relationship.
I love that you say that because I actually only work with the woman. And I believe that men don't they don't belong in that space. Like, sometimes a woman will say things aren't good. I see that we're hitting some walls. Things are just going downhill. Let's go. We need therapy. We need counseling, And so they'll take their husband by the ear and drag him into the office. And now he's defensive. He's completely not sure what you want from him. Like, why am I here? And then the therapist or the counselor or whoever is going to look at him and say, this is very serious. We need to work on this. And then he's like feeling like he's in trouble. Right. So it doesn't bring out the best in him. It doesn't make him want to, his motivation's down to the floor because he's feeling really attacked. And I personally feel like it's counterintuitive. It's not really what's going to help.
Yeah, I think I come from a
Counterproductive.
Yeah, I think I come from
That's
a
the word.
little bit different experience because I have worked with a lot of men individually to improve their relationship. I always call them the husbands that the wives sent to therapy.
Mm.
And I've seen great changes in their relationship working at it from that standpoint. So I think it really depends on the guy, not necessarily across the board. But I also come from a family systems theory background. And
What does that mean?
okay, so this is a way of working with a family. And the part that makes the most sense to me is that if you change any member of the family, it changes the whole family.
Yeah, like
So,
a dance.
like a dance, I always think of it like a script. I
Hmm.
know with my husband, we have a lot of scripts that neither one of us really need to even pay attention to. One of us says our part, the other says their part, and it goes back and forth, and it just doesn't need that much energy because it's the script that's already written. So if either one of us came to that situation and we were being more thoughtful and intentional and said, I'm going to change what I say, then the other person has to change their part of the script. So that works in a couple, that also works in a family. Um, and so I have a lot of faith in people and a lot of optimism that you can really change how that relationship goes just by changing your part in it.
Right. And that's I love that you say that because that's exactly why it works so well, that you can single-handedly change your marriage just by working on yourself, and you don't need to bring your husband in if he doesn't want to, right? So I hear from you that it works really well when the husband's willing to finally do it and go and, do the work. But I just find that when you let them off the hook and you do your part of changing the dance, it just automatically forces everybody around you to notice that you've changed, and react differently.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's usually one person in the relationship who is tracking the relationship. And so they notice changes and they recognize a problem long before the other person does. Now, when that relationship works really well, they can say to their partner, "Hey, this isn't the way it needs to be. This needs to change." And their partner says, "Oh, I trust you. You're right. Let's shift this." But most of the time, that's not what happens. They're paying attention to something else, or they're um, they're a little bit reluctant to get on board. So that's not a sign of a bad thing in a relationship. It just means that if that's part of your role, then you have the chance to make a difference there before it gets to be a crisis.
Somebody once told me about, she was talking about our relationship with God. And she said, just like in a marriage, there's the relationship is only as strong as the weakest. The weaker one is the one that determines the strength of the relationship. You can have a guy completely crazy about a girl, but if she doesn't care about him, even when they're dating or whatever, then there is no relationship there, right? Like, he's just running after her and she's ignoring him. Like, that's not a relationship. So it's not about who loves more and who is the stronger. It's really about the weaker one, and that's the strength of the relationship. And she was saying God in our relationship more, right? And we're the ones who determine the strength of our relationship. And I love it, because it really means that in order to strengthen my relationship with God, I just need to connect more. I just need to get, back to myself and get into that space of wanting to get closer. And in a relationship, husband and wife, I think it's really beautiful that you just, you have that ability to strengthen it, even
I've
just
been thinking
from one side.
I've been thinking
Yeah,
a lot about that idea of being a conduit and being able to um, connect with God's love, God's forgiveness, God's grace, and letting that flow through me rather than me having to be the source of that. And so, what you're talking about that deeper connection is really about not having to bring all of that energy or all of that wisdom or all of that kindness, but being able to to bring that from God to the relationship.
I love that. That's beautiful. And by the way, thank you, Hillary, for your comment. She says, love that. Changing one person in the family changes the dynamics.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
much
And
more
by the way, this is
optimistic.
huge. And yes, it's also huge in parenting. You know, sometimes you have one kid who's making everyone crazy. And instead of trying to focus on that one kid, if you do something to change the dance with anybody, you, the other kids, whatever, everything is bound to change. You just have to have some patience.
Yeah, patient. It is easier. It is sometimes faster to do the work when everybody meets and says, all right, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to change it. But there's lots of reasons why that isn't always possible.
Right. And also, I find that when I make a family meeting and I'm like, this is what's going to change, everybody's already loaded with their stories. So I have a girl who will say, again, we're going to try something and it's going to fail. And that, like, she's already so burnt by the attempts of, let's all clean up together or let's all figure this problem out. Right. So it's very funny because it reflects what's going on in her mind and how she feels about the world. You try and fail and try and fail. And anytime, like, the mother comes up with another idea, it's like, again. So sometimes I'll just start changing things without telling her, and then she'll get on it because she's excited to change things. She just doesn't like the whole planning and failing.
Isn't it interesting how we have these children and they come from the same parents, they grow up in the same environment, and they have these different personalities, this different way of putting ideas together, and it just fascinates me. My kids are also different.
Yes, yes, I love that. I love that because it just illustrates the power of choice, right? Because if it was science, then everything would have come out the same.
Mm.
Same factory, same recipe, same kids. But it's not. Each one chooses their way and has their own, things that pull them, and it's fascinating. I
Yeah.
had 4 girls first, and then the boy came after. So people would say, "Oh, once you have a boy, you'll see, you'll see." And I would say to them, "I don't understand what you're trying to tell me, because like it's not like all 4 of my girls are so girly that now I'm waiting to see what the other side is. I had girls who were, climbing trees and, doing the boy stuff, whatever, that is. Uh, It's so different. Like I can't
Mm.
tell you what a girl acts like because all 4 of them are so different."
Right, right.
So
So I don't have a boy. I can't speak to that experience at all. I have 3 girls. And when I had my first 2, I thought these 2 were polar opposites. They're just so far apart. So then I had a third, and I was like, she's somehow on a different pole. Like she is opposite the other 2 in some way that I cannot even describe or define.
I love that. I love that. Can we get back? I want to hear more about the differences of the two different hats that you have, right? You said you have to treat them differently, or you have to really be in a different mindset when you're doing coaching versus when you're doing therapy. Can you talk more about that? Because that's really interesting for me to hear, and I'm sure the listeners.
Yeah, therapy is much more for immediate crisis and for mental health issues. So if someone has clinical depression or generalized anxiety, something that's diagnosable according to the DSM, then having a trained therapist is really helpful because they can weave in the treatment for the mental health issues. Likewise, if someone is deep in the middle of a crisis. Um, the most the most obvious, the most relatable, the most understandable crisis is when you just found out that your partner had an affair. You guys are in that affair discovery part, and you don't know what's going to happen. Then usually therapy is a better fit. Now, coaching is much more present focused. It's what's happening right now. It's focused on skills and future focused.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I work with coaching clients, they are generally much more stable and thinking about growth, not in crisis and focused on the past.
Hmm. That's so interesting. So you define it by where the person is, the client, where the client is. And I think of it as the same client could be going either way. The question is where do they want to focus,
Mhm.
right? Because if you want to focus in the past and really clean up and, you know, work through whatever is, going on in the back, that's usually more therapy and more, going deep into that. And if they're looking to grow or, change or make, different choices in order to get somewhere else, I see that more as coaching. So I see it as the same client, but, depending on what their focus is. Like,
Yeah.
where do you want to be going?
Well, I could definitely see it through that lens. And I think I'm thinking about when a particular person, because really you could be in therapy and in coaching at the same time,
Yes,
and
I
there's
had those.
real value in doing that. Um, but knowing what those different roles are is really important.
I love that. I have some clients who are in therapy and are looking for a different set of skills and tools to use. And they continue doing therapy on the side while they coach, and it actually works really beautifully together
Yeah, it
because we're
really.
dealing with such different set of skills.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like there's some things that don't do well in coaching. You can address them in coaching, but therapy fits much better. Like trauma is something that does much better with someone who has a lot more training specific to trauma. But skills and enhancement and enrichment and knowing yourself deeper and living a better life, that probably does better in coaching.
That's really interesting. One time I heard a friend of mine who is also a therapist and coach. So she told me this beautiful thing. She says, if you're driving and you need to make a maneuver, you always look at the rear view mirror,
Mm.
right? You have to be able to look what's happening, what happened behind you, what is, whatever traumas or things or, baggage. You have to be looking back. But if you stare at the back, at the rear view mirror in order to drive, you are going to crash. So it's really useful and important to sometimes look back when you're doing maneuvers, when you're making changes, when you're doing certain things, or at specific times. But if you use it to drive your whole life, then you're actually going to crash. You're not going to get where you need to go because you're not looking forward. But I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality is that every couple has some really hard things that have happened in their relationship. And so even in coaching, I talk about it as having repair tools to clean up messes. And while I talk about it in present and future, there's lots of messes that sometimes have to be cleaned up from the past. So as I put those lines between those two disciplines, they're also overlapping. So
Yes.
there's a lot of stuff
Yes.
that's both.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And you were saying there's every couple has things. I don't think that a marriage is a marriage without those things. When we were young and everybody was dating and you were looking for the right guy and it was this thing, right? It's like everybody is talking about all this advice about dating, about marriage, how to pick the right person, and how do you know? And it was really, consuming. And I think to myself, if somebody would just sit us down and say, listen, all of you guys are going to have issues with money. You're going to have to deal with not having enough money. You're going to have to deal with, difficulties. You're going to have to deal with not having the right job. You're going to have to deal with a frustrated career situation, right? So many people lost their jobs recently. Like it's happening to every single family at some point in your life, even if you don't think it's going to happen to you. It's one of those things that is is important for your growth, right? It's like if life is one of those, like, you know what's it called? Help me out here.
Fairy tale,
No,
fairy
I was
tale
thinking of like the things you have to jump over hoops and things and like run
Oh,
around
an
and get to the other
obstacle
side.
course.
Yes. Yes. So I feel like life is an obstacle course and there's certain things that everybody's going to have to go through because there's certain lessons and certain situations that are just universal, right? And that's just one example of, money. There's going to be situations where uh, you know, a different relationship is going to be top of priority than your marriage suddenly, and you're going to have to deal. Sometimes it's just very minute, like, oh, I had a baby and now my whole focus is on the baby, and suddenly it's like, wait, what happened? Marriage is supposed to be first. And it could be that suddenly you're taking care of your in-laws, or suddenly somebody needs you more and you quote unquote neglect your marriage because something is more urgent. Those are normal life things that are going to happen, right? So I feel like it would be a lot more helpful if they would prepare, prepare the younger generation and be like, this is going to happen and this is what you do about it, right? And this is how you deal and this is how you get on with whatever you're doing. Because marriage is awesome, and you have to learn what to do when things are thrown at you. Because if nothing was being thrown at you, then I don't know if it would be that powerful, the
Right.
marriage,
How would you grow?
right?
Well, I don't know about people in your circle. I can say for myself and for people in my circle, it's really hard to hear that something that you are optimistic and hopeful about is going to be hard. I
Mm,
remember before having a kid, and I didn't even know the right questions to ask. And now looking back, there were people who were saying, this is going to be hard. This is going to rock your world. And I thought, oh, yeah, I get that. I get it. But it wasn't until I walked through that and I was like, oh, this is what they were talking about. I didn't get it at all. I didn't even understand that I didn't get it.
right. I
So,
remember someone telling me, you get used to being tired. And I'm thinking, I don't think that there's such a thing. And now I'm like, oh, I get it.
right. Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that we can give people that heads up. One of the things that I have spent a lot of time thinking about is over the years, I've worked with a lot of people in crisis. So the question that I have is, how do I get people to work on their relationship 6 months to 2 years before they have that crisis so that they don't have to have it? And
Right.
so I have
Preventative. I love that.
Right, right. So for 10 years, I have been asking people at the end of therapy, so what could someone have said? What could have happened 6 months to 2 years before this happened so that you would come in before? And
Hmm.
I have only heard one answer in
Hmm.
10 years, and it is nothing. I'm like, that can't be. So I have started working on this. I believe that it is that irritability and um, agitation, that frustration that couples have. Now, this is normal, and couples go through these cycles with this irritation and agitation, and then it dissipates and they stop bickering and things settle down, things are good, but then they go back into it. And it is the level of that which really is that first indicator that something should be changed so that you break that cycle, because a lot of those couples then end up in that crisis down the
Mm,
road.
I love that. And I think that the answer that they give you, nothing, is sometimes because you're so, like, you're so blinded, you're so in it, that it doesn't matter how many people come and tell you this is wrong. You're not listening. Like, you have checked out. Maybe because, and that's why I really feel like preparing, I don't think preparing by telling you it's going to be hard is actually preparing. That's not. That's just being negative and annoying. But, somebody once told me, like, don't feel bad, go take a nap. And I'm like, what's the big deal? I don't need a nap. Like, okay, I'm just telling you, for 10 years from now, take a nap, right? And so recently my daughter, it was her birthday and she gave me a blessing. She said, Ima, you should have a nap every day. I bless you that you should nap every day. And I was thinking, that's a little weird, but she sees the difference when I nap. She's 15.
That's
She
great.
sees the difference when I nap and when I don't nap. And I'm the one who doesn't put it as top priority because I feel guilty taking time out in order to nap. But
Mhm.
the fact that she's aware of how powerful it is and how much it changes the atmosphere in the home makes me realize how not selfish it is and how important it is for the
Yeah.
entire family that I'm actually functional. So breaking up the day and being able to really just, stop, pause, continue is so, so important. So something like that was really helpful. A friend of mine set me up with a skill that I didn't know was necessary, but ended up, turned out that I'm really grateful to her. Another friend, I remember just about, uh, pregnancy and birth and things. I was pregnant and it was my first one. And she started giving me all this great advice about what to do in case of this and in case of that. And I was like, just listening, thinking, okay, that's not going to happen to me, but okay. And when it happened to me the first time, I knew exactly what to do. Right.
Wow,
I'm like,
awesome.
boom, I know I'm going to get in the shower. I'm going to turn it on hot. And, like, you have the things stored in your head. So that's the type of preparation I think is really important,
Mm,
is setting people up with actual um doable, action steps. When
yeah.
this happens, this is what you do. And when you're calm and you're not in the moment, you actually store it in your head very well. Like, you're able to hear it. So I think that's, one second, we have a comment. Hillary says, Bat-Chen Grossman and Cheri, thank you for the incredible information. My children tell me to go tap on myself. I love it. She's a tapping instructor, so I love that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
our kids can see things we can't. Well, I love what you just said. I mean, it's really about planting those seeds that will take root and grow when we need them to. And
Yes.
so they may not recognize, I may not recognize that I'll need that advice later, but it's already kind of embedded in.
Yeah. And about the you know, that preventative measure, I really love that because I'll tell you a story of what happened when I was going through my shift from being a graphic designer to marriage coach. I I had this awakening. Like, I was pregnant, I was really in tune with my body, and I was sort of slowing down and being more present. And I felt being, felt like I was called to start doing something else. And slowly I was feeling that shift. And I turned to prayer and I just kept asking, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And I followed whatever came up, right? So I knew, what does God want? He wants what's showing up. So people started knocking on the door asking for advice. I gave them advice and I was like, okay, I guess I need to be more into this. And it slowly started shifting and taking on its own shape by me being really attentive. And one day I was in the park and I was telling a friend of mine this, and she says, I can't believe it. I had the same shift. I went from this to that, and I started realizing but mine came from a break, right? Like she had to have a complete in order for her to open up her eyes and be like, oh, I get it. And then she started having her shift. And she said, I never imagined that it could be done without that crisis. She didn't ever think, because every time in her life that she gets clarity, it comes through something really, really difficult and really hard and really challenging. And that made me realize that those are the skills. It's, the ability to be attentive, to be in your body, to listen, to pause, to get connected with what God wants, and to actually listen to what's being told, so that he doesn't have to, break down your door. He can just knock and you'll open, right? That's the analogy that comes up for me. And that's exactly what you're saying, is preparing for that shift of a better marriage, of better communication skills, of the ability to have what you need in order to succeed without having to get to a point where you're forced.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people will focus on the wrong part of the problem. I know that I have a tendency to get into a power struggle rather than focusing on what the real problem is. And I will focus on what my husband is not doing rather than what the problem is. Like if he won't pay attention to finances, instead of me paying attention to finances and fixing that problem, I might get super focused on the fact that I can't get him to do that work with me. And obviously, my energy would be much better spent on thinking about the finances than using that energy to try and force him to do this thing that he doesn't want to do. So, yeah, focusing on the right part then frees us to actually solve the problem.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Oh, that's amazing. By the way, we do this in my retreat. I'll show you guys the link just in case. ConnectedForReal.com/retreat. We are going live January 17th. It's a 7-day retreat, and everybody's invited. It's completely free. And I teach you the calm method, which is the method I created to really be in that place of attentive and receive, and, get really, really clear on what's happening and how to master that higher level of consciousness. And we talk about intimacy and designing the atmosphere in your home. It's amazing. Go sign up. ConnectedForReal.com/retreat.
It
Okay.
does sound amazing. Yeah.
Yes, I had to say that because I just was thinking, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I do. Why am I not telling them? So now you know. Now you know. But that's really fun. What else what is coming up for you in this conversation?
Well, one of the things that I haven't talked about is I'm very nuts and bolts, and I've realized that there are 3 systems that need to function well in a relationship for that relationship to work well. So it's probably worth me mentioning that to your audience. When these 3 systems function well, then that love that you feel for one another, the generosity, the compassion, all of that can flow much more easily. And when these systems don't work well, that's when you start building up those walls between each other, and you build up resentment and frustration, and that all blocks love. Resentment and frustration are toxic to
Mm,
love. So,
yes.
um, thinking about this in kind of an intentional way, the 3 systems, the first one is you need to have good relationship habits. Good relationship habits are the things that you do usually every day, although some of them might be more weekly, but they are moments in your schedule when it's already it's already figured out that you're going to connect during that time. So it's a habit. You don't have to find time to connect. It just happens automatically. Now that doesn't mean that you just show up and it's like kind of rote. Instead, you have to bring some energy to that habit, but you don't have to fight with your schedule to find that time because it's already there.
So
Um,
can you give me an example of something that's a habit, a
yeah,
relationship?
I love these habits because they're so straightforward and simple that you could say, I'm going to start a new habit and I'm going to do it today. But I also love them because the habits that you have are what make you and your partner unique from everybody else. So I can give examples, but it's really those ones that people come up with that I can't think of that really make them unique. So it might be that in the morning you have a few minutes before one of you leaves for the day and you just check in with each other about what your day looks like. It could be having some texts during the day that are checking in how their day's going. It could be that at the end of the day, there is some connection that happens when you both get home where you look at each other eye to eye, maybe give a hug, maybe a real kiss. Uh, John Gottman says that a real kiss is a 6-second kiss because a 6-second kiss is worth coming home to. And if you think about it, a 6-second kiss you have to actually commit to.
Hmm.
That's not just a peck on the cheek. It's not just a quick peck. It's an actual kiss. So, other examples are eating a meal together, having coffee together every day, having a good night ritual. So that you can really put that habit any place that it fits. But the idea is that you have it in your schedule. You do it every day. You don't have to create space to connect, and your partner, and you know that you'll have the other person's attention during that time, and you don't have to fight for it.
Oh, I love it. I love that it's so individual, right? Some people drink coffee in the morning. Some people are more into like, checking in or walking each other to whatever the bus stop, whatever it is. This is really wonderful. And actually, I heard that about hugs. If you do an 8-second hug for your kids, then it's a real, that's the hug that's going to keep them all day feeling it. So it's really interesting.
So I have a different number.
Hmm.
The number probably is not important. For me, I've heard a 20-second hug, but the
Oh, okay.
idea is that hug until you feel them relax.
Hmm.
So it doesn't really matter the time as much as that moment where they're like in your arms. That's that moment you're looking for.
I love that. That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So the second system is a way to work through problems. Now, it is inevitable. You and your partner are going to disagree. You're going to get into conflict. You're going to see things differently. And having some rules around how you bring that up, how you work it through, how you get to a solution, and that solution needs to be something that you both can get behind. That doesn't mean that one of you wins. When one of you wins, that means you lose and your relationship loses. So you need a way
Yes.
to work through those things.
I love it. My husband always says a good, what is it? When you find my words today. When you're like, you find the in between place. What's it called? When a
Right.
compromise. He says a good compromise leaves nobody happy because you're
Right.
both at 50%. This one lost 50 and this one had to give up 50. Like, it doesn't really work. So you have to find
Yeah,
ways to make it not a compromise.
that's one of my things I say all the time. Compromise sucks. And that is why my business is named Synergy, because synergy is really that intersection of two personalities that where you co-create a relation, the life that you live, and you find solutions that both of you, maybe you're not joyous about every solution, but you can both get behind. You've at least looked at the other solutions and you say, okay, this is the best of the possible things we can do. So yeah, that is something I think a lot about.
Yeah. Okay, great. So in the moment, having the right systems in place in order not to escalate it and make it explode.
Well, yes. And that explosion is really getting emotionally flooded, having a plan for what happens when one of you gets emotionally flooded so that I think of it like a exit ramp off the highway. Like you
Mm-hmm.
need some way to not be on that highway straight to that argument. You need some off ramps. But yeah, and assuming that that is going to happen. Now, one of the things I tell women a lot is if you want to have good conversations with your husband, make them short, make them focused, and maybe have more of them, but don't try to do these marathon conversations where you try to solve everything in one go. You're going to overwhelm your husband. He's not going to be able to process it. He's going to shut down or he's going to blow up because he's overwhelmed. You've got to be intentional about what you want to solve and doing it in a way that you actually can solve it.
Yeah. So in the calm method that I have, the first letter, the C, is connect to yourself. And
Mm,
then the A is ask and the L is listen, right? So you have to know what you're going to say before you go and ask for whatever you're going to ask for, right? And then you have to be okay with hearing what he has to say. You know, when one time I heard someone say, like, when you ask is very different than a demand. When you demand of someone, then they have to say yes because you're the ruler and you demand this to happen. But you're coming with something very clear about what it is you need, what it is you want, and then you come and you ask, and it's okay if he says no because you're asking. Like, you have to be okay with that before you even show up, right?
yeah. Yeah, very connected to that. I realized recently that there's a lot of advice to tell your spouse what you need. And the thinking behind it is that you tell them what you need because they can't read your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that part is all true, and I'm all on board about that. But what I realized is we are using that to say, this is what I need you to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
you bring the solution to the problem without actually bringing the problem to your spouse. So that's where it's that demand. And your partner has the choice of either saying, yes, I will go along with what you want, more in kind of a robotic, I'm being obedient to what you've just told me, or saying no, but then leaving you feeling really abandoned or unloved. And so when we bring that solution rather than bringing the problem, we
Mm,
really shut down the communication and stop the flow of fixing things.
right. Yeah. And I've noticed sometimes I'll say to my husband, oh, I scheduled this thing and we have to go and whatever. And he's like, oh, you scheduled already. So, like, you didn't even ask me. Right. And then I have to catch myself and be like, oops. Right. Because I have to take responsibility for the fact that I didn't even think to ask.
Yep. Just solve the problem and then he doesn't even have to think about it, but maybe he would like to think about it. Maybe he'd like to have some say.
Right, exactly. So I'm aware. I think that awareness is really important. Okay, so we did the preventative, get into good habits so that things don't have to be bottled in and really just, feeling resentful. Then we're talking about in the moment, you have to have a way to exit the situation, to speak out, whatever you're feeling and to really be okay with the entire system of that you've put into place. What's the third part?
So the third part is that it is inevitable that you are going to hurt your partner. It is inevitable that they are going to hurt you. They are going to let you down. They're going to miss something. They are going to misread a situation. And every couple needs some ways to clean up or repair those things when they happen.
Yes.
I wish it
Yeah.
weren't true. I wish we could find our true love and they would know just the right thing to do and say and always, but it that's not how people are.
Yeah, but I feel like true love would, is the idea is that you're not only, okay, so we're in love and everything is, hunky dory. It's that we're resilient together. You know, we went through these things. He hurt my feelings, and I'm able to say, okay, he probably doesn't realize, because most of the work is in the mind drama and what's going on in my head. It's like, oh, he forgot. Oh, he doesn't care. Oh, it means that he's, a total. No, stop, pause, breathe. It's okay. He just forgot, right? There's the story around what we're talking about. So take a moment and be okay with this happening. Not, I don't think it's, oh, it shouldn't happen. I think it's bound to happen that there's a misunderstanding. It's bound to happen that life is life. He's human, you're human. But how do we deal? What do we do
Right.
now?
It's normal, it's expected. So, what are we going to do to keep those things from building up and clear that out? Now, some of that I think what you're talking about is really brilliant because some of that work can be done in our own selves of really looking at what that expectation is that we had and then questioning, is that realistic? Is it realistic that my husband is going to see that I'm sad just because I'm sad and then know exactly the right thing that's going to help me feel better about that? Well, he's known me a long time, but no, it is not realistic that he is always going to notice it and read it right.
Is
Um,
it even realistic for me to notice about myself, right? Like we're so out of touch with being human.
yes, and that is a very valid point. And then also having things that repair it in the relationship. The most straightforward repair is an apology, but it has to be a good apology. People give bad apologies all the time. You know bad apologies?
Yeah, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings.
Yeah,
I'm no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you're so sensitive.
I'm
That's
sorry.
the wonderful one.
I'm sorry that you took that wrong.
Exactly. I meant that before. Yes. I'm sorry that you didn't understand what I said.
I'm sorry that I did this, but here are all the reasons why it was the right thing to do.
Whoops. So, what is the right way to apologize? Let's get some practical tips here.
All right, a good apology names what you did, talks about why it hurt the other person, and it includes a strategy, a specific strategy that you're going to use so that in the future you won't do the same thing. Now, if you find yourself apologizing for the same thing, it means that your strategy didn't work and you need to think about what your next attempt is going to be. But being able to name a strategy tells the other person that I've thought about this, I'm taking my own accountability and responsibility for it. I am working on this, and I don't expect that I'm just going to fix it. I'm not going to flip a light switch and be different, but I may need to try some different strategies until I actually get out of that habit or stop doing that thing.
Yeah, for me, I really like taking responsibility. I think that the biggest thing is, in the moment, just try to think, what is it that I did, right? Because we're so focused on what they did. Like you were talking about, all of your energy is going on how he should have done something differently or he is not doing it right. We're so focused on how he's the one who's wrong and he's the one who deserves to, whatever happened is because of him, that we don't take the time to say, maybe I shouldn't have done it now, or maybe it's, not the right way, or maybe, there's something that I can take responsibility for that has nothing to do with you. And sometimes it's, listen, I just realized I'm tired or I'm hungry and this was the wrong time to deal with this because I wasn't in touch with my own body. Like, how can I come to you with a situation when I'm not even at my best? So it has nothing to do with what you just did. It has nothing to do with what they're upset at you for, but at least it validates the fact that it's not all him, right? Like I'm
Absolutely.
taking responsibility for a part of what's happening. And that's huge. So even if you don't say the words, I'm sorry, blah, 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 the fact that you're able to really just like own it is huge. And I found myself doing this. My husband would be like, I can't believe you forgot to da 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 da. And I'll be like, you're right. I forgot. You're right. Thank you so much for reminding me. And it's like, uh-oh, she's taking responsibility. What do I do now? Right? Like it changed, like you were
Right.
saying, it changes the dance. Now he can't give me a whole speech about how important it is not to forget because I just took the ball. Like, what do I do now? So it's really powerful. It's really powerful. And I see it in my own life. And it's something that I train my, my groups and my friends to do, because you don't have to think it through and be like, but it's his fault and his like, yeah, we can dance in that whole, swim in that swimming pool, but we don't need to. We could just get out.
Yeah. The question I like to ask is, what was my part in making this go poorly, making this go awry? And that just brings it back to that part that I played in it. That
Mm.
obviously that's not the whole picture. And I think that's one of the problems with apologies. If you just say, I'm sorry, sometimes that means that you're saying, this is all my fault. And we really need to only take accountability for that part that we contributed.
Yes. And now I want to flip it on the other side. Let's talk about forgiveness, because that's the other side of the apology. And you just said something so powerful that I want to address. Forgiveness does not mean the other person is off the hook. Forgiveness just means that you don't have to carry it on your shoulders now for the rest of your life, or at least for the next, 3 days.
Yeah, and I think that applies to self-forgiveness as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I take accountability for my part in it, that doesn't mean that I need to keep badgering myself about having made that mistake. It means that I think that's where that strategy of how you're going to change your behavior really helps diffuse that that self-talk about how I messed up and this is my fault. Well, if you're going to change it, you're going to move forward, then that self-forgiveness is so much easier.
And I'm a marriage coach for women in business. So I have that, I marry the two and really bring God into everything. That's my superpower. And for women in business, it's so crucial to get really good at forgiveness, because if you can't forgive yourself for bad decisions you've made, you're not going to be able to make better decisions next time. And in business, you have to constantly be making decisions to move forward. You can't have those things holding you back. So it's actually a really important practice to constantly do, make a list of things you need to forgive yourself for, and then forgive yourself, and then move on. And
Right.
it doesn't mean they're going to go away and disappear, but it just means that you don't have to, it's taking up so much of your mind space, just holding up everything else, because it's heavy. It's weight.
Yeah. Yeah. That brings me kind of full circle back to your definition of true love. Well, my definition of true love is that not that you love your partner for all their good traits and in spite of their bad, but it's that you love them for their good and their bad because that makes up who they are. And, that also brings us back to that self love that we need of loving yourself, not just for the good stuff and in spite of the bad, but loving yourself because you're in a process. And that means that there is good and there is bad, but that's okay. You're, you're growing and you don't have to even fix all of those things. You're just who
Yeah.
you
I
are.
I think it's so powerful also to try and get away from the judgment of good and bad, because things that we see are as good and bad traits in ourselves are
Yeah.
actually just traits, right? And for a long time, I was beating myself up for not being organized enough. Oh, my business can't grow because I'm not that type of organized person. I can't get it all together, and I can't do the things like everybody says to do. There's rules and you have to follow, and you have to do the things according to the plans and this and that, right? Everybody has a way that you're supposed to do business, especially online business and all these, gurus and things. And what I realized is that the fact that I'm not organized and I'm very creative and I'm like all over the place in my mind has actually made it that I can grow so much faster and do things intuitively that I feel are the right for me and my business. So I've turned around the whole belief, right, that things are wrong for being not organized, and it's actually come to serve me in a really great way because I'm able to change the judgment on the same trait, and
Yeah.
then I use that in order to help other women, is like, stop doing what you're supposed to be doing and really lean into what it is that you're being guided to do, right? Like back to that God connection. What is the next step that you're being led to so that you can get on with that inner transformation and continue to serve in this world. So I think that's, really phenomenal.
Yeah, I think this is an area, I totally agree with all of that. I think this is an area where words fail us, where we don't have the words that let us talk about the idea that any trait has these strengths and these places where it isn't doesn't work in our favor.
Right.
And be, I mean, what's coming to mind is the idea that the Eskimos have, I don't know, 20 words for snow because they have that understanding of the different kinds. And here we're talking about a concept that really needs 20 words of different gradations of to explain these differences. And we're trying to use these words that just don't really capture what it
Right.
means to really
Yeah.
be okay with who you are. And that's, I keep going back good and bad, but it's
Right.
not good and bad.
It's
It's
the
some
whole
other
of
words.
you. Right. It's the whole
Right.
of you. It's just accepting yourself the way you are. And that doesn't mean not then feeling this pull to change and to develop, but more like, how do I, integrate all of myself? And by the way, I was thinking about, the good and bad thing. Sometimes you have a good trait that is totally pulling you off the highway. You have kids who are told their whole life, you're so smart, you're so smart, you're so smart, or you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful. And that actually makes them paralyzed because they can't try different things and fail. They're supposed to be perfect, right? So sometimes we think we're helping by doing that good bad thing, but it's actually all the same. It's all one, and it's fascinating. Okay, we're running out of time, and I want to let you tell everyone how they can find you, because you are absolutely a pleasure to speak with.
Well, thank you. Um, you can find all of my connections through my website, which is cheritimko.com. The place that you can find me most, where you can interact with me, is in my Facebook group. I have created this lovely community of people. It's called Date Night Community. And the purpose is to encourage people to spend some time with their spouse every week. And it gives a lot of encouragement and inspiration and ideas. And sometimes we talk about some of these harder topics, but it is a place that is 100% positive and encouraging. I really think that we need to be supportive and helpful with wherever people are in their marriage, not just, like some groups can be really negative and that's not helpful.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's really beautiful that, even where your relationship is always changing. So, somebody was just talking to me about, I was doing market research on the different retreats, because this is the fourth retreat and it's going to be the last one. So I want to make sure that it's really great. I wanted to ask those people who came to the first or second, to really give feedback. And one lady who came to the first retreat, and I have these quick implementation calls that people can sign up for. So at that time, it was almost a year ago, she had an implementation call with me, and I asked her, how's your marriage doing? She says, it's pretty awful. I'm probably going to get divorced in 10 years because I'm just waiting for the kids to grow up, and I can't see myself living with him anymore. This is just absolutely awful. And so we spoke a little bit. I gave her some, real tips and things and whatever, in the moment that I could. And we kept in touch, which was really great. And she kept me updated a little bit, what she was doing in her business, whatever, but we never really talked about her marriage again. So now that she signed up for the market research, um, she I asked her, "How's your marriage doing, by the way?" And she said, "Oh, it's great. We're having such a great time together, and we finally like really, sparked it, this and that, whatever." And I was like, "Really? I'm so happy to hear." She's like, "Why are you so excited? Like, this is normal." And I was like, "Right. Do you remember? It was 10 months ago. Do you remember?" And she says, "Oh, actually, now that you remind me, I remember exactly where I was sitting and I remember saying that. And now I'm really impressed because I didn't even remember that was where I was. And that is how long it, like that shift was so quick. When
Yeah.
you think about it, she didn't even remember 10 months ago she had said that. So it was phenomenal. And then once she remembered that's where it started, she realized that was when the awareness came in that she wants to take responsibility and do something about it. And that's all it took. A
Right.
free retreat to bring awareness, and boom, there's a breakthrough. So that for me was a lot of fun. But I think also it just shows that the power of you in the relationship, how much you can actually change when you decide, when you want,
Yeah.
when you choose.
Those changes, sometimes they're very small changes. I think about it like if you are on a path and you're moving forward, if you step just slightly to one side and you continue on that trajectory and you keep doing that thing, you will end up in a completely different destination just by making a small shift and then
Yeah.
sticking with that.
I love that. I love it. And it's so beautiful. And thank you so much, Cheri. And thank you everyone who came, especially Hillary, who's been commenting and, being part of the conversation. I love when you guys do that. Thank you so much. And please come back next time because we are doing this is amazing. So thank you, Cheri.
Thank you so much for having